Hi, my name is Rod Cook. I'm a biomedical scientist, a medical scientist, and a research scientist. Today, I would like to discuss the issue of aluminium in vaccines. Okay, it's in a few vaccines, aluminium, and it's misunderstood by so many anti-vaxxers that I'd like to cover it today. So there are two main topics that I need to address when I'm talking about aluminium or aluminium in vaccines. The first one is environmental exposure to aluminium, which is not the vaccine type. And the second one is aluminium hydroxide, the type that's in vaccines. So environmental aluminium comes in a few different forms. It's found in the air, it's found in the water we drink, and it's found in the food we eat. It's found in infant formula and breast milk in higher concentrations, in much higher concentrations than in the Hep B vaccine. So infant formula and breast milk has much higher concentrations of environmental aluminium than the Hep B vaccine, which has adjuvanted aluminium. We'll come to that. So aluminium hydroxide, adjuvanted aluminium, comes in a few different forms. So it can come in AlOH3, AlPO4, and AlOOH, to name a few. Each of these adjuvanted compounds are completely different from each other, and they are hugely different from environmental aluminium in the form of Al3+. So aluminium hydroxide in the form of AlOH3 has characteristics that exclude it from ever being able to cross the blood-brain barrier. In the fields of biochemistry and cell biology, if a compound is excluded from being able to cross the blood-brain barrier, it cannot ever be a neurotoxin. To be a neurotoxin, it needs to be toxic to neurons. If it's excluded from being able to cross the blood-brain barrier and gain access to neurons, it simply cannot be neurotoxic. So to be toxic to neurons, it needs to have a cumulative effect on neurons. So simply, if a compound cannot cross the blood-brain barrier, and if it cannot gain access to neurons, then it cannot be neurotoxic. I know that there are a few misleading journal articles, YouTube videos, and memes, I hate memes, out there that confuse most anti-vaxxers. And today I'd like to address some of these. So let's get an understanding of this aluminium element. Okay, so where do we find aluminium? Aluminium is the most abundant metallic element on the planet. It's the third most abundant element on the planet, with 8.3% of all elements on our planet being aluminium. Aluminium takes up in inorganic soil particles. It's a major component in inorganic soil particles, which is why it's in our food and our water. So aluminium is a group 13 element with 3 valence electrons. It has 13 protons, 13 electrons, and 14 neutrons, with a molecular weight of 27 grams per mole. It's commonly found in bauxite and gibbsite, with the word aluminium meaning, it's Latin for bitter salt. Environmental aluminium, however, can be freely equated and form Al3+. It's also found after cleavage by acidic rain or acidic biological conditions. Okay, so equated Al3+, okay, that has been released through acidic rain or biological conditions, has been noted to be toxic to aquatic life, kills fish, and has been implicated as a toxic factor in a number of human diseases such as Alzheimer's disease and dialysis encephalopathy syndrome. Equated aluminium, Al3+, is not in any vaccine schedule. Okay, so that's not in any vaccine schedule. The aluminium that's in vaccines is an adjuvant and is never in the form of Al3+. It's commonly found as aluminium hydroxide or aluminium phosphate in the forms of AlOH3, AlOOH, or AlPO4. These adjuvant salt forms are 78, 56, 59, and 121 grams per mole respectively, with sizes of 78, 59, and 121 Daltons. Okay, so I'm going to put up table 1. Table 1 shows the physical geometry differences between Al3 plus and the adjuvants used in vaccines. Okay, so this brings us to the blood-brain barrier, the difference between these. The blood-brain barrier excludes the transport of small molecules, with 98% of all small molecules unable to cross the blood-brain barrier. Exclusion through this barrier is based on physiochemical properties, molecular size, positive or negative ionic charges at physiological pH, and hydrophilic structure. Okay, so there's 4 main reasons why it won't cross. Al3 plus, environmental aluminium, can cross the blood-brain barrier in its form at physiological pH, but ALOH3, ALOOH, and ALPO4 cannot cross the blood-brain barrier. So articles like those by Christopher Exley talk about aluminium and aluminium hydroxide as if they're one and the same, which is really deceptive and misleading. So Exley's articles are not talking about concentrations of aluminium hydroxide. They talk about the concentration of elemental aluminium in the form of Al3+. So Exley states in his article, to date, the majority of studies have used hair as the indicator of human exposure to aluminium, while aluminium in blood and urine has also been used to a much more limited extent. Pediatric vaccines that include an aluminium adjuvant are an indirect measure of infant exposure to aluminium, and their burgeoning use has been directly correlated with increasing prevalence of ASD. The aluminium content of brain tissues from donors with a diagnosis of ASD was extremely high. All 4 male donors had significantly higher concentration of brain aluminium than the single female donor. We recorded some of the highest values for brain aluminium content ever measured in healthy or diseased tissues in these male ASD donors, with values of 17.10, 18.57, and 22.11 micrograms per gram dry weight. So that's what he says. What's interesting in that statement, the paper starts talking about environmental aluminium in hair, then blood and urine. Then skip forward and put in a different link to a different form of aluminium, not environmental aluminium, but aluminium hydroxide, a completely different substance. Then we skip back to what level of environmental aluminium can be found in the vaccinated, which is totally misleading, and how brain samples found levels of environmental aluminium and how high the prevalence of environmental aluminium was in the samples. So did you follow that? All the different types of aluminium. They looked at the concentration of environmental aluminium in human samples and sneakily attributed that environmental aluminium as aluminium hydroxide. Aluminium in the form of Al3+ is not administered via any vaccination, not via any vaccination. Aluminium hydroxide or aluminium phosphate are the adjuvants found in many vaccines and are completely different chemically, biologically, and physiologically from environmental Al3+. So aluminium by itself is in no vaccines, whereas aluminium hydroxide, which can't cross the blood-brain barrier, is in a few. The neurotoxicity of Al3+ has nothing whatsoever to do with aluminium hydroxide and aluminium phosphate. Exley's journal articles looking at the concentration of environmental aluminium in human brains. Any conclusion drawn from this only highlight the fact that not only are elemental forms of Al3+ everywhere, they're in everything. And this next point is very important. Aluminium hydroxide has never been shown to exist in a human brain. Al3+ has been shown to exist in a human brain, in hair follicles, etc. But aluminium hydroxide has never been shown to exist in a human brain. Not once. To write a journal article about aluminium, to start your introduction off about aluminium hydroxide, then to test environmental aluminium, and reporting your conclusion that you found aluminium hydroxide in the research is not only dishonest, it's fraudulent. Aluminium hydroxide is excluded from the human blood-brain barrier. It can't get through any channel pores, any transport pumps, or through the tight junctions. Aluminium hydroxide does not have any route of entry into the human brain through the blood-brain barrier. Not one. Environmental aluminium in the form of Al3+ can breach the blood-brain barrier, and this is what he tested. So know the difference between the two. Environmental Al3+ is vastly different from aluminium hydroxide. Vastly different. So different, in fact, it's like comparing a mini car with a Mack truck. Sure, they're both automobiles, but they're not the same. The Mack truck won't fit in a tight car parking space at the local shopping centre. Exley completed a study on 1 gram of tissue. Yep, 1 gram. And researched environmental aluminium, Al3+, in that tissue, not aluminium hydroxide. So I must say, reading that article almost gave me inter-optical cancer. Never have I read an article that starts off talking about one compound or one substance, aluminium hydroxide, then tests results on something else, environmental aluminium, and concludes about talking about aluminium hydroxide. But that's not the worst part. No. The worst part is the language used through the paper. It's not one of a confident researcher. He uses words like probably, likely, most likely, possibly, what looks like when describing the experiment results in that 1 gram of tissue. Then, when describing the cells and structure of the human nervous system, again uses those same type of words. Probably, possibly, what looks like, and most likely. So these words should tell anyone who has an inkling of science or basic English understanding that the results were not only inconclusive, but biologically, Exley has no idea what he's talking about. This is demonstrated by a statement about how a possible leukocyte is possibly in the process of entering the blood-brain barrier through the lymphatic system. High school biology should have alarm bells ringing in your head right now. The lymphatics run out of tissue spaces. They run away from them. Lymphatics in the brain runs away from the brain, not into it. This paper, it's misleading, and it's a terrible example of a published journal article. So what have we covered? Environmental aluminium, Al3+, is the third most abundant element on Earth. Environmental Al3+ is found in air, food, fruit, vegetables, water, and drinks. Al3+ has been studied extensively in mammalian brains, rats, and a few humans, thanks Exley. Environmental Al3+ has been found in the human and rat brains and hair follicles, blood, and urine. Aluminium hydroxide is not commonly found in air, food, fruit, vegetables, water, and drinks. Like I mentioned, aluminium hydroxide is excluded from being able to cross the blood-brain barrier. Aluminium hydroxide has not been found in any human brain. Aluminium hydroxide is excreted from the body naturally. Aluminium hydroxide is not a neurotoxin as it can't breach the blood-brain barrier. Aluminium hydroxide is in vaccines at such a small concentration it's readily excreted. Environmental aluminium, however, in food, water, breast milk and the air is a concern. However, it's not the same product as aluminium hydroxide. They're not even closely the same thing. So check out this graph I threw together of a few concentrations. Al3+, environmental on food, water, baby formula and breast milk compared to the volume and concentration of aluminium hydroxide found in the Hep B vaccine. Now, they're completely different. Al3 plus and aluminium hydroxide are different, but it shows you the different levels and concentration. What you're looking at in the first column is the volume of environmental aluminium. Aluminium Al3 plus that is in breast milk, 816 quadrillion atoms in breast milk. Adjuvanted ALOH3 and Hep B vaccine has 11 quintillion atoms of aluminium hydroxide. In the next column, Al3 plus in water, lower limit reading, so it's a lower limit reading in water, 200 quintillion atoms of Al3 plus in water, the lower limit that they can get it down to possibly. Al3 plus in water, the higher limit that they're allowed to go to is 312 quintillion atoms of aluminium in that water sample. Al3 plus in baby formula, the lower limit is 53 quintillion atoms of aluminium Al3 plus allowable in that product. Al3 plus in baby formula, the highest limit they're allowed to go to is 94 quintillion atoms of aluminium in that baby formula. So aluminium hydroxide is not the same as elemental Al3 plus. Don't fall for the memes that say otherwise. Thanks for listening.